Todd Profit here one more time for Lighting and Sound Tech at the State University of New York at Fredonia. Today we're going to do we're talking about moving lights and LEDs and scrollers, and just give a quick brief overview of the different types and what they are. First thing I'm going to talk about is just different light types. We've already talked about this before, but just a quick refresher course. There's two main light types that all of these are going to be divided into, and that's either profile or wash. Profile is going to have a harder edge that you can soften a little bit, but you're going to be able to typically shutter or put a gobo into a profile fixture. A wash fixture, its purpose is to get a lot of color out, and with a nice soft edge. It's soft enough that you're not going to be able to put a gobo or anything in it. So all of these are going to have profiles and wash lights. Okay, so within moving lights, you'll have profiles and washes. But there's two main types of ways in which we deliver the light, meaning how we actually move the light around. And that's either a moving head fixture or a moving mirror fixture. Let's start with the moving head fixtures. That's the ones we're showing over here. This is where the whole body moves. The light itself actually pans and tilts and moves into place. These are the dominant ones. We're not seeing a bunch of the other ones anymore, but as technology has been advances, they've been able to make components smaller, and they've been much easier to get around. The advantage of this is they just have a much larger range of motion. So as the light's moving around, it goes, it can sometimes spin more than 360 degrees. It can spin over 500 degrees. It can tilt high and low. You're not as limited when we talk about the other type. It's a little more limited. And that's the moving mirror type. The moving mirror type is where these were some of the first ones that came out because it was harder to make it do all these things. You needed a big box to put all of the moving parts in, and then the only thing that would actually move would be the mirror itself. And here's an example of one right here where the light just gets shown out and then the mirror moves around. Now the disadvantage of this is one big disadvantage is it can't move as much. Okay, it can't do as big as spins. It can't do as much as a moving head fixture. It also is more fragile. The mirror is something that can easily be broken. So those are the two main types. Now within a moving light, I'm going to move back to this for a second. You're going to have different types of light sources. There's three main light sources you're going to see for a moving light. First is an arc source. Arc sources, we've talked about before, can't be dim, but they can really go long distances because they're really, really bright. They do give off a lot of heat. Now, tungsten, typically the light source itself can be dimmed. To do this, you're going to need either an onboard dimmer or have a separate output on the moving light, a separate plug-in for the tungsten, but usually it's all built into one, and there's usually just a dimmer in one. A lot of times it's like an IGBT dimmer that's going to be on board for you. The last engine you'll see is LEDs. Okay, as they're getting brighter, more powerful, we're starting to see those become the engines over the tungsten and arc. With the tungsten lamps, the one thing I did forget to say was if you already have tungsten lamps in the air, they're going to blend seamlessly with your other lights. But if you use an arc or an LED, their color temperature is going to be different, and they're going to be more noticeable. Now, for me, I'm okay with that because usually when I'm using them, I'm not trying to blend them in with other lights. I don't necessarily want them to stick out, but I'm okay if they have a little different color temperature because I'm not trying to get them to replace my conventional lights. They're doing something completely different. Parameters. We talked about this before when we talked about DMX, but there's a bunch of different parameters that you can do, and this is only just a short smattering of it. We talked about this before, but again, I just put to the side how many addresses some of these things take up. Pan and tilt. That's pretty self-explanatory. Intensity. Okay, could be an onboard dimmer, could be an LED, or could be a mechanical dimmer, and that's what we were talking about before. If you look in your textbook, there's a great picture of what those mechanical dimmers look like. Focus, the edge of the beam, make it hard, make it soft, and particularly when you're using gobos, you're going to want to use the edge. Zoom, many moving lights, most moving lights have a zoom function. They have two lenses in there. They can make the beam bigger or smaller depending on what your needs are, how big you need the beam. The advantage of zooming the light over just doing an iris or shutters is when you zoom the light, when you zoom it in, you keep that intensity, you make it more intense, and it'll throw farther and brighter. Next, we have gobos. Again, a wide variety of things. You can have up to just like one gobo wheel, may have 3 little gobos in it. Could have multiple gobo wheels with multiple gobos. Usually 1 or 2 is the most I've seen. Then each one of those gobos can actually rotate. Well, they can rotate. They don't have to. Sometimes they can be static. So that's why you need a whole bunch of addresses for those. Color mixing, 3 different ways we're going to color mix. First is RGB. That's going to be with LEDs. That's red, blue, green. Again, look at the color lecture. CMYK mixing, you're going to use discs or a series of louvers to make those. And sometimes in cheaper moving lights, particularly like the ones we have in the Light Lab, they just have color chips. So they've got a wheel with a red, a blue, and a green, or whatever colors that they decided they wanted, and you only have those colors. But again, those are pretty rare. There are even some moving lights that put scrollers on the ends. The most famous one of those is the ETC Revolutions. Ask me sometime when I'm not on mic. I'll tell you how I really feel about those scrollers on the end of those on those Revolutions. Okay, then we have the iris. The iris is essentially a shutter that's that just opens and closes the aperture, the size of the beam. Shutters, like an iris, except they square things off. They're not round like an iris. A prism. A prism actually takes the light and bends it into multiple different, it actually takes the light, so it takes, you could put a gobo, and it'll take it and it'll make it turn into like three or 5 different images, just like a prism would. Strobe, pretty self-explanatory. The light's dim. And then lamp controls. Now, lamp controls are just some different, I forgot dimmer curves. Dimmer curves are, particularly with LEDs, they don't dim like tungsten lights, but we want to mimic them to dim like tungsten lights, because what we don't want to have happen is the tungsten lights going down really slow. And remember, even when they get to the end, they got a little bit of electricity left in them, and they're still glowing a little bit before they go completely out. Well, what'll happen with the LEDs is they'll go out kind of quick. They have a much different curve. So sometimes you want that, sometimes you don't. So you can actually choose what dimmer curve you use. Lamp controls are the last thing that you can control, and it's things like turning the arc lamp on and off. It's a fixture reset. Just have a whole bunch of different modes, and lamp controls might be take up 1 or 2 addresses. All right, let's talk about LED. So LED lights are static, typically. And again, we have profiles and washes. Their profiles look like an ERS. They can have gobos. They have shutters. We're still working on really making those gobos look really, really good, because they're not a single light source. They're a multiple light source. They're still working on trying to get the optics right. And a lot of them are really being successful. So they've got some really nice looks. Then we have wash LED lights. Those are your par lights. Those are your cyc lights. With LEDs, we have color. A lot of times they're going to be, you'll have LEDs that are just white. Those are typically for film, video, or TV. They'll just be white, but they'll be different color temperatures so that they can match what other lights they have, or if it's film, match the color temperature that the film stock needs. Oftentimes with other color combinations, there's a whole bunch of different combinations. The most basic is RGB. RGB is great, but they don't always make the best white light. Go back and watch the color video, and you can see where it tries to make white light. It's not the best white light in the world. So that's why a lot of times they'll put, and when I say RGB, that means there's a red emitter, there's a red LED in there, a green LED in there, and a blue LED in there. Then we have some other combinations, RGBW, which is white, A is amber, I is indigo, and L is lime. Why lime? Well, remember I said how hard it is to make that RGB, or to make that white light. They have found that the lime emitter, or the little light lime LED, actually makes it look good. There are many other combinations, but those are the sort of the main ones that you'll see a lot of times. Other parameters you'll see in LEDs are zoom, strobe, and a dimmer curve, just like we had talked about on the moving lights. So next thing I want to talk about are scrollers. Now, scrollers are starting to go out of style just a little bit. We're starting to see them less and less. One of the major scroller companies, Apollo, recently, actually they closed their doors. Because they sort of saw the writing on the wall. This one down here, this is the Wybron Forerunner, which was one of their lines. Apollo does still make them. We have Apollo scrollers at Fredonia. But essentially, all it does is it takes a series of it's gel. It's taped together, but very, very well, and it rolls from one color to the next. Okay, sometimes there's little sensors in there that tell you where the next color is. That's the way the Apollos work. But there's a couple different ways that we did color strings. First, 10 to 24 colors. That would be what these would be right here, and they're literally just a single scroll that go across. Then they also had other scrollers that were 2-string color scrollers, in which it used a combination of 2 strings, one going up and down and one going left and right. And as those would mix, you would make new colors. It's not good to put my hands in front of the microphone. The Wibron CXI was an example of those. Now, the thing with scrollers is they need a power pack. There's no place to, most of them, not all of them, but most of them, the ones that are out there, needed a power pack. Now, what the power did was that way you didn't have to plug in each scroller as you went along the line. You would get a power pack and then run a 4-pin cable that had power and data. So you'd put the power pack we still have these at Fredonia. You put the power pack on the electric, you plug it in, then it sends power out through, and you plug in DMX as well, and then it sends out power and data through a 4-pin cable. Here's what those look like. This is one of the bigger, this is the Apollo Smart Color 600. I think we have some of these downstairs. I know we have some of the 400s downstairs as well. But they come in different sizes, 400, 200, 300, just based on how many watts they had. This is just an example of the Rosco one. It's just a little single one that you can do 1 or 2, 50 watt, and you can do 1, maybe 2 things on it at a time. These also run other things like IQs, which we'll talk about in a second, or gobo rotators sometimes. All right. And last but not least, miscellaneous. I just want to talk about the IQ for a second. It's a moving mirror you put on the end of an ellipsoidal or any profile. You could actually put this on an LED profile, which, I may have to try that someday. And it's a moving mirror, and again, it needs a power supply. Alrighty, that's what I want to talk to you about moving lights. Just a quick introduction to what they are: moving lights, LEDs, and scrollers. Thank you, guys.